Good afternoon and welcome to Goethe-Institut in Exile, Goethe-Institut in Exil. My name is Marc-André Schmachtel. I'm part of the team who is organizing this project space here and the events and this festival. I'm happy to welcome you here to this first edition and first panel of the panel series that we've organized, panel on cultural narratives. And yeah, I don't want to speak too much. I will just say this welcome and want to give the stage over to the panelists and want to introduce as well the moderator, Fabian Mühlthaler, who is the director of the Goethe-Institut in Ukraine, and I'm happy that he is moderating this panel as the initial panel. Thank you very much, and have a great discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marc-André. It is my great pleasure to welcome you all to this first discussion of the panel program in Goethe-Institut in Exile. Today's topic is maybe the most directly connected one to Ukraine. As you know, the Goethe-Institut in Exile platform is dedicated to artistic expression and cultural exchange with countries where this exchange is restricted for various reasons. Now, in Ukraine, the reason for this restriction is due to external aggression and threat and war. I think this needs to be underlined because in Ukraine, in the case of Ukraine, we are far from talking about an illiberal context or something. Quite on the contrary. The Goethe-Institut cooperates as well with independent cultural practitioners, with independent art scene, as well as with state organizations. So it is very important to us to work with both partners, and this is important to underline because this narrative of a modern, forward-aiming, liberal and democratic Ukraine is little known in Germany still, and we see this. This narrative of a Ukraine that is under historically imperial or colonial pressure. This narrative is not only carried by an urban intellectual elite in Kyiv or in Lviv, but is carried by the vast majority of Ukrainian society. And I hope that we can elaborate on this and talk about this aspect with our panelists. Thank you for being here already. I would like to introduce, first of all, Lyuba Morozova, a dear and great and long-standing partner of Goethe-Institut. She is very much engaged in the raise of awareness on Ukrainian culture and art history. Lyuba is originally from Slovyansk in the Donetsk. My parents are from Slovyansk. That's what I meant by originally. She's a musicologist, an art critic, and artistic director of Kyiv Symphony Orchestra. Her first experiences as a curator she made in 2014 when she co-managed the platform Don Kult, which was a platform that showcased contemporary culture from the Donbas region to an audience in Kyiv, because this exchange was also very necessary. Happy that you're here, that you made it from Gera in this case, and it's great that you're with us. Thank you very much. Dr. Susann Worschech is a social scientist at Europa-Universita Viadrina in Frankfurt an der Oder. She started to build up her intense knowledge about Ukrainian civil society in 2004, analyzing first of all the Orange Revolution. Susann Worschech will tell us about the continuities of a democratic and liberal mindset of Ukrainian society and the massive transformations in Ukrainian society after the Revolution of Dignity, which is here known under its much less suitable and much less beautiful name, the Euromaidan. And Susann Worschech says Putin does not understand Ukraine. He underestimates the civil society there. Thank you for joining us and elaborating on that. And last but not least, Dr. Jörg Morré is the director of the Museum Berlin-Karlshorst, which caused quite some media attention by raising the Ukrainian flag only just 1 or 2 days into the escalated war. First day on the 24th of February, instead of the 4 flags usually there in front of the museum, there was only the Ukrainian flag. It was all over the media. And this was an extraordinary step, I must say, since at that point, the museum was still called Russian-German Museum. Also, the name of this museum has been hidden or crossed out, which is an extraordinary step in that early in a war, and especially for German standards, where processes like these tended to be a lot longer. Thank you very much. We are looking forward to hearing from you about the complexity of bringing in a different narrative into an institution that deals with memory, culture, and historical narratives that we got used to, that are omnipresent. A very difficult task, and looking forward to hearing from you as well. Luba. The Goethe-Institut noticed that straight after the outbreak of the war on 24th, our partners, the cultural activists, cultural practitioners, they redefined their role. They searched for a most suitable way how to engage, how to be active, how to be supportive. Some of them even joined the territorial defense. We know what Serhii Zhadan, for example, did. Others try to bring in their skills in cultural practices, how to be of help in this really horrible and terrible struggle. And it was you who first approached us with the form like the Kyiv Symphony Orchestra. Now we have to go to Germany and Poland, not because we have to flee or we want to go away, but because you said it's important to make this Ukrainian artistic position known to a German audience, to an audience abroad, to raise the Ukrainian voice, to tell people and make people listen to Ukrainian authors, composers that they have never heard about. I would be interested in what were your objectives, your aims in doing that, because as we know, now many cultural organizations do that. Left Bank Theater, many Ukrainian artists go to Germany and they go exactly with the same message. You were the first ones. What were the reactions? And do you think that you achieved the aims that you set?
Thank you, Fabian. So I can say that last 4 years we prepared for this tour. It is certainly like that because we invited the conductor from France, who is Italian, Luigi Gaggera, to implement Ukrainian music into a European context. And it was really very important for us to show, firstly, Ukrainians, that we are not only the part of this big Russian culture, but we are the part of European culture. Before this full invasion, our last concert was with only Ukrainian music, and we also founded Letashinsky Club to speak about Ukrainian music and to play it. And there were a lot of people on our concert, really full hall that bought tickets during last week. So it is impossible, really impossible in the real life to have a full booked hall in a week because of Ukrainian music, because of repertoire. And when this war began, so we decided that we need to do the same, but not in Ukraine, to do the same abroad. The second reason was that our base for rehearsal base, was a strategy object, so we couldn't play there. And we understood that we need to meet us in other countries. So thanks to Poland, we had our rehearsals in Poland. People came there from all over the world. So I was, for example, in Bulgaria at that time with my children. And some men came also from the war. We had soldiers who came to the orchestra to bring Ukrainian music, because even for them, who were on the war and who thought that it was really important, that it is maybe much more important to be here and to translate what what Ukraine is in the most, as I can say, most straightforward way with music. So we started our tour with Poland, and then we had 7 concerts in 7 days. In 7 days in all big concert halls here. There were also concerts in Gewandhaus, in Berliner Philharmonica, and in Elbphilharmonie, what was a dream for us, of course, but what was really very excited, that German public, they not only supported us, but it was, so in Ukraine we say it like by hamburger bit. So when it is the real level, so when you understand your real level. And not only of our orchestra, but of Ukrainian music. For example, we played not very easy symphony. It is the 3rd symphony by Boris Letoshinsky, who had written it after the Second World War. And the name of the symphony is that the peace defeats the war. And we played this music that in some of booklets were written like Letoshinsky is a kind of Ukrainian Shostakovich. oh my gosh, yeah. and after this, I saw a lot of critics who were really excited and asked me why didn't we know this music before, and I told him, why didn't you know this music before? It is really great music. So it is not only the question to us, it is question to you, why now? So now we have our rehearsal base in Gera, in East Germany, and so we have a lot of tours. Our next tour is in November. 2 days ago we were in Paris Philharmonie. We played Ukrainian music together with French and with Mozart, with French music and with Mozart. And what was really very interesting, that Berezovsky and Bartnyansky, who lived at the same time as Mozart, and as well as Berezovsky had the same teacher as Mozart, so they were in one part of the concert. And after that, Paris Philharmonica, they published the video on what was Bartnyansky played, and underlined it as Kyiv Symphony Orchestra Mozart. So because it was really the same language, the language of epoch, so it doesn't mean that Bartnyansky wanted to write like Mozart, but I think that it is the sign that so when you feel it, when you hear it, so you don't even need to explain something. You feel it and you hear it, that Ukraine was and Ukraine is the part of Europe.
Thank you very much, Luba. I have to say, I was at the concert and at Elbphilharmonie, and it was really absolutely amazing, as well educational as emotional. And if you have the chance to see one of these concerts, please go ahead. And it's a great way to support, and also to know something that has really been not lost, but is not known enough. And it really shows that Ukraine is on the artistic landscape of Europe. So Luba is really part of this new Ukrainian cultural and civil society, which pushes forward this narrative. You have done a lot of research about these massive transformations that we see in Ukraine society, especially after the Revolution of Dignity. I would be very grateful if you could describe how is the cultural and the civil society in Ukraine set up, what impact do they have in this transformation process, and why do we in Germany know so little about it? Because I know from myself, I had to work and live in Ukraine to really feel this impact and to be really convinced about the sustainability of it. So why is it so difficult to know about it?
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you also for having me here. Whew, these are really huge questions. So talking about Ukraine's transformation process and the role of civil society and culture in that process is something that we could continue talking about for days and days. But maybe let me start with one short aspect that could make it clear how our perception of Ukraine's civil society and Ukraine's transformation is put in a nutshell. And this nutshell is one article that came out exactly 20 years ago by an American scholar. He was a political scientist, Mark Howard, and he wrote an article that was called The Weakness of Civil Society in Post-Socialist Europe. And this article with this title it became extremely popular. Mark Howard said he was a great scholar, he did a great work, and he was working on this weakness of civil society. He was publishing in the best journals, he was publishing books and books afterwards. And I think that this article, I mean, we could discuss it now 20 years later from different angles, but I think it shows one very interesting aspect. First of all, Howard was doing research empirically in Russia and Germany, and he was generalizing his pieces of work to the civil society in the post-socialist world. So, wow, coming from Russia and German civil society and talking about the weakness of civil society in the post-socialist world is one thing. And the second aspect was that this article was also very popular because many agencies who did then democracy promotion and who supported civil society took this article as a certain legitimation for what they did in Central and Eastern Europe and supporting civil society and fostering democracy promotion or fostering democracy. And Ukraine was among these countries where many Western agencies did their programs on civil society support and building civil society and so on and so on. And they were referring to, you see, there's a scientific piece on the weakness, and that's also in Ukraine. And I think it shows very perfectly what we did not see, and this is the strength of civil society in Ukraine, what is completely different to other countries in the post-socialist world, which is, I mean, what is the post-socialist world? But you see, this made it very clear that we have to focus on the civil society in Ukraine and what they did and what they are. Because even in 2002, we could have been aware that there was a civil society in Ukraine already decades ago. So there was a very lively dissident movement stemming from the maybe early 20s and 30s, not so much, but then getting stronger in the 1960s and 70s in the Soviet Union, and people who were in this dissident movement during these times were pretty active in the 1980s. There were organizations founded in the 1980s around the Chernobyl catastrophe who are still active today. And from these movements, we see continuing lines to the independence of Ukraine in 1991, to the huge democratic movement called Ruch in the 1990s, to other movements who prepared the second huge revolution after the Granite Revolution in 1990, then the second revolution in 2004. And there are still continuities to those groups and movements and organizations who more or less prepared and then staged what we call the Euromaidan. So there is a high continuity on the one side of these civic actors and civil society organizations that we can trace back even to the 1960s. And this is a huge strength of Ukrainian civil society. But there is also an aspect of weakness, I would say. And the weakness was that until 2013, the civil society never really cooperated with what we could call the political system. So there was no huge exchange. So civil society did organize movements and demonstrations, and they were writing papers and doing projects, etc., but they never really shook hands with the political system due to several reasons. And I would say that these reasons are pretty obvious when you are living in an authoritarian system. But what changed in 2013 and 14 onwards was that people from the strong civil society then entered the political system, they entered into positions of responsibility to take up the idea and the spirits of Euromaidan, or the revolution of dignity, to go into the institutions, also in the cultural institutions, and to continue their work where they could have a larger impact than being only in an NGO, so only in quotation marks, of course. So this was a huge change, because when we see the strength and the resilience of civil society and of society in Ukraine in general at the moment, we can trace that back to the Euromaidan, which was a watershed moment in Ukrainian civic or civil society history, where these two polarized sides, so the good civil society on the one side and well, not a bad political system, but a political system that was definitely problematic and seen as something where civic activists didn't want to enter, where those two parts, those two poles in a country came together. And what also changed, and what is extremely important, was that in particular in the arts and culture scene, there was a huge movement during the Yanukovych time, so 2010 to 2013, which was a repressive time. We were speaking about shrinking spaces during these times for civic activism, also for progressive arts and culture activism. But there were groups like the curators groups, Viadrina and others, who were founded during these times, who were very active, who were extremely progressive, and to try to be active against these shrinking spaces and against this repression by an increasingly authoritarian regime during that time. And then when it came to Euromaidan, it was a moment when exactly these progressive groups, who were perfectly trained or who were perfectly experienced in organizing arts and exhibition things and lectures, but also demonstrations, meetings, and so on, came together on the Maidan and could build upon these experiences and could sort of organize the civic movement of Euromaidan, and also the many aspects after Euromaidan, where then people from these NGOs, but also from curators, collectives, from art spaces, entered the institutions, also cultural institutions like the Ukrainian Institute, and tried to change the administrations and all those small pieces where you can change the society in the administrations and institutions and media and so on and so on. And I think that this on the one hand, continuity of civil society and also cultural activism, and the renewed and intensified spirit since 2014, since the Euromaidan, those are the reasons why civil society and the Ukrainian civil society in general is so resilient today, and they are very aware about two narratives that they are working on since more or less the middle or the mid of the last century. And these two narratives of the Ukrainian society are sort of national self-determination on the one hand, and democracy and civic liberties on the other hand. And we see these aspects coming together today in many realms of civil society and cultural society. I would like to continue speaking why we don't see that in Germany, but maybe first of all I give the word back, and we will come to that later.
We will definitely come back to that, but I can absolutely confirm from our own personal experience from Goethe-Institut what you were saying. All our partners that we work with have a direct connection to the Revolution of Dignity. They were on the Maidan, and we see them now in the ministries, but also outside the ministries in independent art organizations. This is really a really massive phenomenon that underlines what you were saying. Coming back a bit to the narratives and the difficulty of like implementing a new narrative or implementing the complexity of two or more competing narratives in an institution like the Museum Berlin-Karlshorst, which is a difficult task. I was mentioning it in the introduction. First of all, of course, I would be very interested in what the reactions were to your actions on the 24th of February from the public, maybe also from the board of your museum, and how will you go forward now? How will you implement this complexity into your work from now on? Because I could imagine that this is a very difficult and big task.
Yeah, how to start my reply. So the reactions were both. For the first days, they were very positive and said, "Yeah, great, well done," and so on and so on. But a few days later, they started the critics, because there were some people from our audience, from our visitors, who feared that we will forget about the victims of the Soviet Union when we are wiping out the word Russian. And this is maybe...
Maybe you could quickly describe in 2 words about what your museum is, because
yes.
I'm not sure that everybody is
yes,
aware.
okay. Okay, this is briefly. Karlshorst is the place where the Second World War in Europe ended, 8th of May 45. There the Wehrmacht surrendered in front of the Soviet headquarters. This was in this building, which is nowadays a museum. This is the reason why this house became in '67 a Soviet military museum, because of the historical meaning of this place, run by the Soviet army in the GDR. So after German unification, it was clear that the Soviet soldiers, at that time still Soviet soldiers, will leave Germany, and the German government made the suggestion, okay, we continue the work of the museum in this place together, Soviet, German. And then the Soviet Union broke away, and only the Russian Federation left in Karlshorst, you can say. So the last agreements were made between Germany and Russia, and the last Russian soldier left Germany in '94. So this is the first step why we are named, or why we started as a German-Russian museum. And then we started as an association, a Verein, so became a completely new permanent exhibition, about the exhibition a bit later. And then the German director at that time, at the late 90s, suggested, okay, we have to cooperate with the huge museums about the history of World War II, at that time named Great Patriotic War, in Kyiv as well as in Minsk, as in Moscow. And so the museums of the history of World War II in Kyiv and Minsk became members in our association. That's why at the end we are four nations, but the name was still German-Russian Museum. So and on our front fence wall there was written up to February this year, German-Russian Museum, Deutsch-Russisches Museum. But in front of the building there were 4 flags of 4 nations: Germany, Russia, Ukraine, Belarus. And so this, our action to put away the other 3 flags and to show only the Ukrainian flag and wiping out the name, or just the 2 words, German and Russian. There was only museum shown. Yeah, we are still a museum. And so this was the action, positive reactions, and then the critics. And the critics said, okay, when you're wiping out Russian, that means you will forget about the Soviet victims. And this is the first mistake made in Germany, made by Germans, whatever, thinking when we are talking about Russians, that means Soviet Union, or the other hand round. And this is, how can I say, it's already tradition. So it's the lazy language. So we are not caring about the difference between Russia and Soviet Union and so on and so on. And especially for my museum, the start of a cooperation between Germany and the former enemy, at that time Soviet Union, that time I mean World War II, was a very good idea, I guess. It's still a good idea, but it's roughly said only focusing with one unit, one country, and the name of this country is Soviet Union. And by lazy wording, I would say, it's Russia. So, and this is still going on. So if you have some articles or books, especially for example in English as well, so one of the very good books about the Soviet military administration in Germany is Russians in Germany. So briefly, it sounds good, and so this is the one mistake. So when I started as a director of this museum, it was in 2009, and in 2010. I suggested, okay, we show these 4 flags because there are 4 nations. And, but at that time, when I traveled to Kyiv and to Minsk and to Moscow, it was, I would say, still a bit the Soviet period. So my colleagues were educated in Soviet Union. For them, it was clear we are talking about the history of Great Patriotic War. The veterans, many of them were still alive. So, for example, in Ukraine, they tried to switch over from 9th of May, Victory Day, to 8th of May, because 8th of May is Victory Day here in Western Europe. It didn't work because the veterans said, I fought in the Red Army. For me, of course, the end of war, or Victory Day, is 9th of May. Don't tell me anything about 8th of May. So the veterans are gone, so it's much easier to switch over in this date. In our museum, we have a play in the design, a play with the 8th and 9th of May, because this is very interesting in an intellectual way. It's one action, act of surrender, but there are two dates, and there are 2 perspectives. 2. This is the next mistake. A Russian, a Soviet perspective, and a German perspective. And when we discussed our completely new exhibition, permanent exhibition was made completely new in 2013. One point was we are still had a look on the Soviet history. So we had a look on the Great Patriotic War. So that was one country, one space, I would say. Of course, we knew that there were differences that we tried to point out. For example, the approach of the German politics at that time in the 40s, 41, 42, there were differences between Ukrainian, Belarus, and the Baltic states, and so on. But roughly said, for us, it was the Soviet Union, the Soviet space. And on the German side, it was a bit funny. One day I said, okay, in Germany we have maybe 2 perspectives, East and West German, GDR and what is it, Federal Republic. And one of the colleagues said, no, when we are talking about Soviet Union, it's GDR is the same. So this was the moment. It's in the about 2010, 11 at that time, and of course we noticed that it became more and more complicated to talk about one narrative from the East, one Soviet. There was no Soviet narrative. On the one hand, the Russian narrative told by the Kremlin became stronger and stronger and stronger, and more and more and more propagandic. This was, without knowing anything about other countries, it was already clear. This is more and more difficult to get in contact with this narrative told by the Kremlin. On the other hand, my colleagues in Kyiv, educated in Soviet times, they became a bit old school, I would say. And as a polite colleague, we said, okay, this is not our business, so they have to discuss it there in Kyiv. We are not going into this discussion. We are looking on the National Museum of the History of World War II. And that's what they offer us. We take it for, how can I say, for the truth. And now I would say it's a mistake, because we noticed too late, I would say, that there was an ongoing discussion. Now it's clear, but now there's war. So last point, when we made our action with the flag, the Ukrainian flag, for us it was already a second step, I would say, against the Russian propaganda. The first step was made in November last year, when there was a process against Memorial, the human rights organization in Russia, and Memorial did some historic research as well, and there was a process of to eliminate this organization. They did so, and we showed an exhibition made by Memorial in our garden, in our park. And this was the first time that we said, this is not right, what's going on there in Moscow. It's against our aim to talk about, honestly, to talk about history and to have many perspectives. This was not a perspective in a national way. But to make the second step in February, when we all were shocked, so waking up 24th of February and it's war. And it's not fighting somewhere in the east, Donbass, Luhansk, and so on. It's war against the whole Ukrainian, rockets to Kyiv. And we all were shocked. At that time, we all were connected via Zoom and so on. So we met in this Zoom space, in the digital space, and discussed it for, I would say, 30, 35, 40 minutes. And it was clear we have to do something. That's what you showed out. So, and I think it was a bit spontaneous, but for us it was in the context of a longer discussion. And nowadays, I would say, when I started my journeys to Kyiv in 2009, first context with the colleagues there in the museum, I already noticed something, and now today it's much easier for me to point out what it was. It's kind of feeling not so good. And how we could go on, I don't know. In the German perspective, it's still very, very important to get in context with the former enemy, and that means with all the countries which were connected in the Soviet Union. So with Ukrainian and Russia as well, and Belarus and Baltics and so on and so on. At the moment, there's no way to come into a quiet, honest discussion with the Russian colleagues. Some of them they won't, some of them they are not able, and so on and so on. So we have to wait. This is one point, and we have to preserve some of these things we started 30, 35 years ago, because at that time, German unification and the discussions of the 90s and so on. At that time, I think it was a good idea to say, okay, we have to care about a place like Karlshorst. It's important. It's important to discuss about history. And how this discussion goes on, I don't know, but we have to be prepared that there is a possibility to get into this discussion. Is of course, 4 flags, 4 nations. Maybe there have to be some more flags in front of the museum.
Thank you very much. I think the raise of awareness is the key question here. From my personal experience, I'm by academic background. I'm also a historian, and just a few weeks ago, I was in Buchenwald in the memorial site, and I noticed on one of the boards there was like an inscription, like an explanation of what happened there, and they said, well, in this particular area of the camp were mostly French, Dutch, and Russian prisoners, and I asked myself, well, were these really Russians, or were they maybe Ukrainians or Belarusians or other nationalities? And it struck me that, because I had I trained my eye a bit and I got aware of it, that when we talk about history, especially about the history of the Second World War and the Holocaust, Ukrainians or Ukraine almost always appears only in a collaborator's context, and very, very rarely in a victim's context. And I think this is worth noting, because the narrative or the stereotype, yeah, Ukrainians, you know, this is a fascist society and they're all anti-Semites. This is exactly what the Russian president is basing his narrative on to justify this war. And that's why for me it's very, very crucial to raise awareness in Germany and maybe even also in Ukraine. I don't know, how do you feel when you hear things like that, and what is there what we can do about it?
Am I Nazi? Really, so maybe first months I thought, firstly in Bulgaria and then here in Germany, that maybe in some points I'm too radical. And then I went to Estonia, to Tallinn, and so I've taken part in one big conversation together with other people from arts field, as well as an ex-president of Estonia. And when she had her speech, I understood that I am not radical at all. Yeah, so that countries that understand what Russia is, that they don't need a translation. So when you are in Lithuania, Estonia, Poland, and so on, so you don't need to explain something. You maybe think that in some things you are too late because they already had this narrative in 90s or even before. So I heard a lot from that ex-presidents that so I understood only after that she really was true. And so I was also Soviet educated. Partly because so when I went to the primary school to the secondary school, it was Putsch. That time, 1991. So before this, it was a question for me who I loved more, Lenin or Jesus Christus. Yeah, because it already was the time when a lot of Protestants were in Ukraine, and at the same time Lenin cult was still on a very high level, and my father was communist, and so a lot of strange things. So and that time I was in Slavyansk. My father and my mother. Motherland or their city, and so Putsch I saw from the screen from TV 3 days of Swan Lake on the TV. So if you're really fond of Tchaikovsky and Swan Lake, so it was the best time for melomans. Yeah, and yeah, and now. and now, so I tried to understand what his Swan Lake was really, because for me Tchaikovsky was one of that composers that I really loved and I still love. So it is not the point that so today I love him less. I still love Tchaikovsky, and but what with this belly, it was really a challenge for me to understand how from the really very interesting fairy tale that came from here, yeah, from Nesselwank and Swan Lake there, Schwanzee, this really very interesting legend, to the symbol of death, yeah, because so Putsch, it was the symbol of USSR death, and before it, Khrushchev. When he had in his time some partners from abroad, all of presidents had to go on Swan Lake. And I read some memories of Maya Plisetskaya, who told that Khrushchev and she danced it more than 800 times. Only Swan Lake. So Khrushchev told that after that, after Swan Lake, I can't sleep, because in my dreams I see these belly skirts that are together with tanks. Yeah, so already for him it was a symbol. And when Brezhnev died, so firstly nobody told it. On the time of news time, was Swan Lake on the TV. And then every handshake, yeah, the General Secretary of USSR, when they were dead, so people understood it from the Swan Lake on TV. Yeah, so we understand that culture, and in this case, Russian culture, it is not only the culture. It is something that they used as a symbol and sometimes as a weapon, and they still do it today.
Exactly. I think this is the problem, that this use and this over-representation of Russian culture, it does something to the mindset of our society, and it's very hard to get rid of it. I found it very interesting when we talked on the phone, Dr. Morré, that it wasn't so easy that to do this process as quickly as other societies did it, because we are so used to it. Maybe you can also elaborate on that. I would also like to, when we're looking for ways how to raise this awareness, and many of our partners in Ukraine, they support, or they even carry the campaign called Cancel Russia, which basically demands like a kind of moratorium for cultural representation from Russia. So no panelists from Russia. They should not be, the authors should not be read, and the composers should not be played. Maybe you can explain a bit what's behind it, because it's a campaign that is very, very hard to communicate in Germany. Maybe you can quickly explain what is behind, and maybe I would be interested, what is your take on this campaign?
So I'm maybe I'm not so radical. I can't say cancel Russia. So for me, it is like to make a break for Russia and to have an empty space for Ukraine. Yeah, because so we really need our voice to be heard. Yes, we really need place to play our music, to show our culture, and there were maybe too much Russia last time, too much for us, but too much for you too. So in my Hochschule, Musikhochschule, yeah, in Music Academy in Ukraine, so like 50% of all that I studied was Russian music. So we didn't have a special course in German music or in French music, but so with Russia it was like this, Russian music. So a lot of Ukrainian streets are named by Russia places. We had Pushkin almost in every city. That's not only with Lenin. And we didn't have the same right for Russian and imperialist artists and for Ukrainian artists. I think you know Pushkin as not only as a name, but as well as his works. What do you know about Shevchenko? Yeah, who is the same figure for Ukrainians? You know Tchaikovsky. But what do you know about Mykola Lysenko, who was a Ukrainian friend of Tchaikovsky? And when Mykola Lysenko had written his main opera, Taras Bulba, and Tchaikovsky told him, oh, I can prepare it for you. So the premiere on the main stage in Russia, but you need to translate it into Russian, yeah, because Ukrainian language on the stage was forbidden. And for many years. And Lysenko told no, and that's why he didn't heard his opera during his life. And the same we had till today. And what I can say that Russian culture that is really great, but it is only one of the cultures. It is not the main culture. Yes, the main culture in the world. How they tried to show us in Ukraine. Yeah, it is really great, but it is only one of the cultures, and they use it as a weapon because you know, it is a soft weapon, and to demonstrate that yeah, from one side there are soldiers, there are murders and so on, but still they are human because they have this great culture, and so we understand that maybe we have to help them and to support them because of this culture. So my idea is, please don't give them this weapon. Don't give them their culture as a weapon.
Thank you very much. Any thoughts to that?
If I may. I would take this discussion up because we have it maybe not under this claim cancel Russian, but we have a similar discussion, of course, in the academic and in the sciences. So how to cooperate or how to continue our cooperations, scientific cooperations with Russian scholars, when we have long-term cooperation projects, etc. Of course, all that is on ice at the moment; it's on halt. But what to do with all the contacts we built up in science with Russia, with Russians? It is difficult, and there are many different patterns how to continue cooperation or not continue cooperation. But what I would say is that this discussion shows an important aspect, and maybe it is important not to frame it as a cancel debate, but to frame it as a debate of false balance. And the false balance problem is, of course, there, because there are many things, or there is a huge part of East European culture that is claimed to be somehow Russian, and it is not Russian because it's somehow from this post-Soviet or Soviet realm. And there is only very little knowledge and very little awareness about what culture is from Ukraine and what Ukrainian culture can also tell us. I mean, if we are looking on language courses, for example, tell me what are the places where you can learn Ukrainian language at a Volkshochschule in Germany, even at a university. There are at the moment like 10 or 12 universities in Germany where you can learn Ukrainian language. You can learn Russian anywhere. And I think this is an aspect of false balance that brings us to a false impression of what Ukrainian language, culture, and cultural identity is. And maybe a second aspect that I would like to underline is, you said that there's a certain lazy wording in this differentiation between what is Russian, what is Ukrainian, what is Soviet, what is post-Soviet. I would even say it's not lazy wording, it's lazy thinking. Because, and in particular in Germany, we have not been very interested, or most Germans have not been very interested in differentiating between Ukrainian, Russian, and Soviet and post-Soviet aspects, in particular in culture. When we see that on an international level, we see that it has political implications. For example, why is Russia part of the United Nations Security Council? Because it is, I mean, it never applied for that seat. It never officially has been announced to take the seat. It just took it from the Soviet seat. So here we have a political reality that is problematic, but we see this reality also in the culture. And we see it that we do not know aspects from within Ukraine, of Ukrainian culture. We are working with stereotypes in the German society, and the typical stereotypes that come up when we are talking about Ukraine is not, okay, what is the cultural history of that country, but the stereotypes are like, okay, there's corruption, there are oligarchs, there's fascism, and there's the Donbass, that's something like Russian. So, yeah, and Chernobyl, okay, yeah. So we have these stereotypes, but if people would be interested in, for example, exploring the stereotype of the Donbass, they could see that in particular since 2014, there were many, many interesting places and culture organizations, for example, who were founding organizations, or who were founding places to meet, small stages, etc. So we're founding and establishing cultural places or exchange places. And for example, a city like Mariupol, but also Sloviansk or Lysychansk, and these cities, which we know today from the massive war effects, have been developed into cities where small cultural places were established, like reading cafes, like small stages, small clubs, etc. For example, in Mariupol, we had this platformer TU, who were extremely active, and I know that the Goethe-Institut was also intensively cooperating with them. So these were very progressive culture activists who turned the stereotypical, like, Soviet industrial city idea or image into, okay, there's something growing here. There's some free space where we can establish new cultural identities of the Donbass or of East Ukraine, whatever. So I really like what Platform ITU wrote on their homepage. It was like, for some people, Europe or Mariupol is at the edge of Europe, and for us, Europe just begins here, in Mariupol. So think about this sentence. It was really cool. It was extremely progressive. And that does not fit our stereotype of what is Ukraine or what is Donbass or whatever. So I would say that instead of speaking about cancel this or that, we need to address this false balance and show the heterogeneity and the richness of Ukrainian culture, which is extremely different in different places, but which makes up a modern and progressive Ukrainian identity, and an ambivalent identity, of course. And that's more difficult to see and to describe, because it's an ambivalent pattern. But I would say that we definitely have to address what has been developed during the last years, and what does it mean for Ukraine and Ukrainian culture today.
Completely right. One point, Luba said, kind of timeout. Yeah, it's wonderful. That's right. The Russian culture is so huge and so overwhelming that there has to be a timeout, a break, to give space to other cultures. And yeah, and to you, keep in mind the how can I say, the institutes or the German universities doing research towards Eastern Europe. I mean, or the institutes for Eastern European history or Slavistic studies, they are still strong, and they are, of course, when I studied in Hamburg 35 years ago, of course you could learn Ukrainian. There was teaching lectures about Ukrainian history. One of the most important researchers, Frank Olszewski, doing research, he taught in Hamburg and so on, of course. But this is only in an expert discussion, and this is still strong. And Germany is extremely strong in comparison with the other Western European countries. So there's a huge knowledge and in Germany about all Slavistic languages and the whole. I would say, yes, I would say. And in historical terms, I want to add, in the early 2000 Nullerjahre, what's Nullerjahre in English? Early 2000s, yeah. And we discussed about forced labor during World War II. It was focusing on Ukraine, because most of them, the majority, were Ukrainians. So forced labor was a direct connection with Ukraine. So next point we missed, I would say. Think about the European Championship in football, 2010, when I remember. 12. It was Poland and Ukraine. Poland did it. So the focus was on Poland. And this is not only our fault, but the main games, the finals and so on, they all were in Poland. And this was a missed chance, I would say. Yes, so time out and give more space to Ukrainian culture, right? Yeah, we have to to bring down this overwhelming Russian culture. But the last point, this is my personal mistake, I would say, when I decided to study Russian languages, I thought at that time, okay, you learn Russian, it's like English in the western part. At that time, Berlin was still standing, Cold War and so on. Okay, and you learn Russian, you can speak to everyone there in the other part of the world. The first man I met, he came from Poland. Yes, and I offered my Russian. Huge mistake. So, yeah, but how can I say? At that time, it's a long time ago, but this was a kind of opener for me personally. I started with Russian. Yeah, and noticed, okay, in Poland there's another language, and it's better to talk in English with Polish people and so on. But yeah, this was the first step, and now we have to make this the second.
Yes, let's make the second step. For this second step, we think we are all ready for impulses, for hints. If there's any question from the audience, I would like to open up and give you the chance to ask our guests.
Please take the mic.
Yes, thank you very much to the panel. I mean, we are talking a lot about how to change the narrative in Germany, and we heard about what you, as the director of the museum Karl Zorn, did, what you are demanding or doing with your orchestra. You talked about the civil society in Ukraine. But what would be your positions, a part of perhaps pausing the representation of Russian culture in Germany? What other steps would you like to see, how to change this narrative that we see also in the media, in the public discourse, also on the streets, demonstrations we have in Germany also because of the rising energy costs. What would be your recommendations? What could German civil society do? How could we approach and try to change or influence the narrative? Thank you very much.
Better wording. To name it clearly. So this is the first step. And yeah, and once again, if there's space, if there's a timeout, it gives room to other perspectives, and maybe not only to Ukraine. So we are concerned in Karl Zorn with Belarus as well. So it's completely different situation with Belarus. We won't discuss the situation of Belarus now, but keep in mind it's an own language, culture, and so on and so on. The wording, I would say, this is the first step.
Recommendation.
I can only tell it from my side. So I think that what Ukrainians should do to make their culture more sexy for Germany, yeah, and to see the common points in history and in arts, in thinking, and what I can say that it is now it is not only the moment to ask you to bring to bring a space for us, but as well as it is really the time of that is high emotionally for us. And for example, my favorite Beethoven the Seventh Symphony is that is played by Daniel Barenboim after the Berliner Wall was falled. And it was 2 days after in Berliner Philharmoniker, and a lot of people from DDR came only with their pass. So it was custom loss for them, and I saw not only tears on their faces because they could go to the west part of Berlin and listen to this music, but Beethoven was not the same as usual. So maybe technically it wasn't on that high level than on the best recordings, but emotionally it was incredible. So I really like this recording, and thanks to Goethe-Institut, and so I was a curator of Digital Concert Hall, this project of Berliner Philharmoniker in Ukraine, and I showed it to Ukrainian people to understand how the political and social moment could fire the masterpiece.
Well, I would say that this question of what can be done has several different addressees. I would say, so for example, for my part, the academia scientists are doing their work when they're going into public debates, like right now, or also into media debates. We are working on, in particular at the Viadrina in Frankfurt Oder, we are working on establishing certain aspect of, or a certain program of Ukrainian studies, which is of course difficult and a very long-term thing, and you need a lot of money and etc., but we're trying to establish a possibility where students can study Ukraine, and also Ukrainian language, Ukrainian politics, society, etc., so that's one part. I think what everyone can do is being careful with the wording, and also being careful when you see and hear in the public media that there's a very strange wording. Like, for example, there are always examples like the so-called republics are not called so-called People's Republics in the Donbass, but they are like People's Republic of Donetsk. Then to go into and to write to the public media, please be careful. These are no republics. They are so-called annexed parts of Ukraine. Please call it like that. So we all have to be careful, and I think we can write emails to the public broadcasting stations. Then I think one important aspect is also increasing exchange and cooperation. Like I know that there's an increasing amount of city partnerships, which always includes cultural cooperation with orchestras, with choirs, with or also cooperation between schools and so on. So, for example, the city of Potsdam, as far as I know, is now preparing a city partnership with Ivano-Frankivsk. Hamburg established a partnership, or they're on the way to establish a partnership with Kyiv as well. And there are several aspects of establishing town partnerships. Of course, at the moment it's very difficult. So because, well, you cannot really encourage people to visit a Ukrainian city right at the moment, but you can start with humanitarian aid, with exchange, with asking, okay, how can we help, etc., etc. And there are so many activists. There's such a lively civil society in nearly every village in Ukraine that any sort of partnership and cooperation could help and could establish an understanding. Just to make that clear, the oldest city partnerships between Ukraine and Germany date back to the 1980s, and they were even founded from Western German cities to Ukrainian, then Soviet cities, out of this idea of, well, we have to learn to know each other because once we were enemies. And there's still a very close cooperation until today. And people are very proud of this cooperation. And finally, there's one thing where I would say Ukraine could do something, and Ukraine could have been done more in the past, and this would address the Ukrainian-Institut to present modern image of Ukraine, because it is a modern country. It has a modern and very progressive art scene. There is, for example, this one, I don't know his name, but probably you know him. He's a very famous cook. He's called the Ukrainian Jamie Oliver, and he's like, Klopotenko. And these are persons who can present very, very modern European Ukraine to Western German societies and Western European societies. And I think this is extremely important, that we start to change our image of Ukraine. That's something in the east, and there's the Donbass, and there's post-Soviet industry, and then they have the strange borscht. Okay, maybe it is okay, but who knows? No, this is extremely modern. And it's extremely progressive. And the Ukrainian Institute is the institute to transport this new image. And I wished I started thinking in 2014 already that we would need a modern Ukrainian, sort of Ukrainian Institute representation right here in Berlin with a cool, fancy cafe and whatever you might present as the so-called Goethe-Institut from Ukraine. And it would have been good to present that. Okay, it wasn't the case, but now it's time for the Ukrainian Institute to be very, very present, I would say, in Europe.
To be fair, they're doing their best, and they have been founded in 2018, so they're really struggling hard, and they're very good partners. They played a role in co-curating the Goethe-Institut Exile, and we are strategically working with them, and I'm sure you know that there's the plan, very determined plan to open the first branch abroad of Ukrainian Institute in Berlin, and we are hoping that this project will soon be real. There's two other questions.
Thank you so much. I would be interested in comments on the role of language as such in the Ukraine. I have students and colleagues from Mariupol and from Kyiv who speak Russian and who have Russian as their first language, and from Kyiv and Lviv in the west who who have Ukrainian as their first language, and of course both of them say they are bilingual, but obviously, I mean, there are very negative comments by relatives they have in Russia on the Ukrainian language as such. I mean, they call it, they don't want to hear it on the phone. They say it's a dog's language, Hundesprache, yeah. I don't know if you have heard about that you can only speak Ukrainian to the cows, cattle language. I would really be very interested in your opinion on that.
This really is the problem of how it's called, high and low language. Yeah, so in linguistic it is the common thing. Yeah, so in Soviet time and in Imperial it was high language, that was Russian. So if you want to make a career, if you want to be at the right place, you needed Russian. So it couldn't be something that is really high intelligent and technical, something from the space sphere. Like Gagarin couldn't speak Ukrainian, of course, yeah, because all of this must be on high language in Russian. And Ukrainian was, yeah, it could be in society, but it is like the language of peasant. So it could be useful, but I still remember that even in my childhood, when I was a child in Kyiv, and in my class there was only one guy who have spoken Ukrainian. And for our class, it was like maybe he's strange or he's from the village. What does it mean? And so my mother language is Russian. I worked with Russian language. I was a music critic in maybe you know this Russian newspaper Kommersant. And it was also in Ukraine, and after the Crimea annexion, it cancelled. And after that, I tried to have all public communication only in Ukrainian, but still I was Russian speaking in my family, and so now so for me it is really very hard to speak Russian now. So even to say something, so sometimes I do it with the people for whom is really hard to speak Ukrainian, but for me it was not only because of the war. It was when I firstly came to Tallinn, and in Tallinn it is really evident when you see one part of society that is Russian speaking and another one that is Estonian speaking, because Ukrainian and Russian are more close, yes, to each other, that these two languages. And you see that it is not only two languages, it is two worlds. And I don't want to be part of Russian speaking world.
Frau Worschech.
I would just like to add that you see that this is a very strong narrative that Russia forced in the early 1930s with the first Russification campaign, when it was extremely important, and from time to time it was even forbidden to speak Ukrainian, and also to speak Belarusian, for example, in Belarus and so on. So this Russification was extremely powerful. And it built up on the narrative, on the idea that all these languages are minor languages. They are like slang. They are like, peasants languages. And of course, if you want to be cultivated, if you want to show that you're well educated, you had to speak Russian. And this was still so obvious and so strong that, for example, when I was doing my research for my PhD dissertation in 2011 in Kyiv, I wanted to learn Ukrainian, and it was not possible in 2011 to learn Ukrainian as a foreigner. In the early 1990s, there were 2 universities founded in Ukraine where you could speak only Ukrainian and where you could only write and do research in Ukrainian. This was the Kyiv Mohila Academy and the Ukrainian Catholic University in Lviv. So these were 2 universities in Ukraine where you could write your thesis in Ukrainian. On all other universities it was not possible, and at that time it changed them. Then from year to year it became better, but still to learn Ukrainian as a foreigner was not possible in 2011. So there were dozens of language schools, and they all had Russian, of course. And then, okay, I learned Russian in Kyiv, which was pretty strange, because I wanted to learn Ukrainian. And most people on the streets asked me, even in Kyiv, well, it doesn't matter if you learn Ukrainian or Russian, just learn Russian, it's easier, and you will get along in the whole country unless you don't travel to Uzhhorod. So there's one. And then I traveled to Uzhhorod, and I really got problems with my Russian. Fortunately, I spoke also Polish, and then we agreed on speaking Polish, so this was pretty strange. But this was a strong narrative, and from that background, we see that it is a huge progress that many people like Sehi Jedan and others, literatures, poets, writers, and so on, turned to write and to do their cultural work in Ukrainian after Euromaidan, at least. And this is a huge step forwards, I would say. And it makes clear that Ukrainian language is, of course, a real language. It's not the small Russian, as Russians have it. And I think it's very important for Ukraine.
It is a real language. There's no discussion about it. One point, as an historian, I would say we have to do more research about, common research about the Soviet history. This is clear. In German, I would say Aufarbeitung. But if I talk about Soviet culture, it's more complicated. And this is connected with what Luba said. The main, or the colonialism in language, Russian language, made by Moscow as a central state of, or the center of the Soviet Union. This is very, very complicated, very interesting. So let's do more research about the Soviet area, both in Ukraine and Germany and wherever. So.
I think really this sheds also the light on the colonial and post-colonial aspect of this narrative. Someone once said to me that in Kyiv and Odessa people speak Russian for the same reason as people in Lagos, Nigeria speak English. There was another question.
As the Embassy of Ukraine, I would like to very briefly comment on the language issue. Of course, Ukrainian language as well as Ukrainian culture is too radical for Russia. So that is what Russia has been fighting for years against. So this is language, Ukrainian independence, culture, it was always forbidden. But my comment is about Russian great, so to say, culture. And of course we should cancel Russian culture or at least mute it, because we should think about that from the perspective, what does this culture teach its own population? How does this culture educate their own people? Is the Russian population, the Russian society, is the society based on democratic freedoms, based on values of humanity, is able to fight for its rights and for its freedom and democracy? I'm afraid not. Thank you.
A reaction to that comment?
I understand you as Ukrainian, of course, but I think it is really hard to explain it in Germany after the Second World War. Yeah, because how the nation of high culture had Nazism and why people were killed when the music of Bach were played. So it is still a question for me.
Well, it's an extremely difficult question. Emotionally, I would absolutely agree. I would say, I mean, people are still listening to Wagner, and Wagner does not really stand for democratic political systems. I think it's important if people want to listen to Russian music at the moment, it's important to contextualize. And I think it's equally important to speak about violence culture in Russia, because I would say that we do not know enough about the culture of violence that has impacted on the Russian society for more than 100 years now. And there is still this culture of violence which is extremely important in that war, of course, but which is extremely present in the families, in organizations, in the political system, of course. There is a culture of patriarchalism, or whatever, of domination, and I think we have to address that. So I wouldn't say that it's, of course it's problematic to deal with Russian culture at the moment, but maybe it's also a moment to take up these aspects and to show what violence in a culture means and where does it lead, and how can we cope, or what can we do against this culture of violence, which is always present in many cultural artifacts in Russian culture, I would say. So turn it into an educational aspect, I would say, and contextualize it. That would be the approach that I would like to see, but emotionally, of course, I can understand. And well, I'm playing the piano and I cannot play Mussorgsky at the moment. It's too difficult for me as well, unfortunately, because I love it.
I think the time is running out, but for one or maybe two more questions, we still give ourselves the time. Yes.
Just a small comment. First of all, I just wanted to say also about the language. Even today, even in this discussion, I think we need to be very careful and not even to repeat or try to discuss something like this insulting narrative about Ukrainian language being language. I don't even want to repeat the words. And I'm from Lithuania, and the Russian language, it's an instrument of manipulation and of controlling people. In Russia, I'm also a linguist, and Russia is the only country with this size where there are almost no dialects and almost no differences in the standards of language. So it doesn't matter where are you from, you can always understand each other. So in Lithuania, a small country with many, many dialects. What I wanted to say is language plays an important role. And for all Ukrainians, I completely agree. And I just wanted, Ukrainians don't need it. I hope the time will come, and very fast, where there will be no need to even address and respond to such insulting description of Ukrainian language. So don't even reply to that. Thank you.
Good news for you from YouTube and from streaming channels, because even before the war, on the list like top 20 of Ukrainian music, it was 1 or 2 Ukrainian language music. All other was Russian music, and so I saw the statistic today during last half year, how it changed. So every month there were more and more Ukrainian music with Ukrainian language. And for today, I saw only 1 Ukrainian song, and all others were in Russian, and all others were in Ukrainian. So I think it is a really good sign, because usually it is that music that mostly is listened by young people. So it is a sign that young generation really turned to Ukrainian.
Maybe one short point. I think we have to speak out these things, these historical facts clearly, to be aware why it is so important to support Ukrainian language. Because in Germany, the perception is still that Russian-speaking Ukrainians are pro-Russian and Ukrainian-speaking Ukrainians are pro-something but not Russian, and that's simply not true. There's no congruence between the language and the political orientation. There is no congruence between the language and the feeling of whether you're Ukrainian or not Ukrainian. But the perception in Germany, in the German society, is so strong. And there's always this idea that it's a broken country with a pro-Russian East and a pro-European West. And people who know Ukraine know that this is absolutely bullshit. But we have to be very aware and be clear that language has been used by Russia to foster this narrative. And we have to argue against that and make clear in which way the Ukrainian language should have been eliminated by the Russians. And this is the point, why it is important to make clear how it was also called. And now to foster and to strengthen Ukrainian language and Ukrainian culture and Ukrainian identity is an important aspect, but we have to speak about that clearly to make it obvious that this was a political attempt to suppress Ukraine.
Thank you very much. I don't see it. More questions? I might add to that as the final word. Someone from Ukraine told me that, and he's in a position where he can make such a statement and assessment, the hope for the modern, future, democratic, liberal Ukraine is the Russian-speaking Ukrainians. Ah, there's one. Well, that's
it's very important. So, like, why Russian speaking? So, Ukrainian speaking Ukraine. It's really, I totally agree. We need to explain. We need to speak about it. But so, why to focus on Russian language? I think it's very important. Ukrainians are discovering the language for themselves. I'm also listening to many spaces on Twitter. Young people discovering poetry for themselves. I was like amazed, like people, young, so like teenagers, rediscovering Ukrainian poetry from themselves, citing poetry listening to shelters, so sitting in the bomb shelters. So Ukrainians don't need to focus on Russian and saving Russian language in Ukraine. There's much more to discover about Ukrainian language and Ukrainian culture, also in Ukraine. And what, sorry, thank you so much.
Regarding the language, it's rather a comment. I think the most important is not what the language we are speaking now or the language that our parents were speaking in Ukraine, but the language our children would speak. For example, I might address my sister in Russian because this is the language we were speaking our whole life, but both of us, Russian speaking, would address my nephews, and my sister addresses her children in Ukrainian. I guess we should, this is the state of the arts that some people in Ukraine, not pro-Russian, but they speak Russian language. We should just accept it and think what we can do for the future. And I guess the tendency that more people speak to their children in Ukrainian is already a good sign.
And maybe the last comment.
Okay. You know, British soldiers killed a lot of people over the world, so let's prohibit English. German soldiers killed a lot of Ukrainians and Russians, so let's prohibit Deutsch. Ukrainians killed a lot of my relatives in Babi Yar, so let's prohibit Ukraine. Guys, it is funny. It is not the question of the language, it is question of the culture and politics. A lot of people who speak Russian in the Ukraine, and in Russia, in Kazakhstan, in Moldova, they hate Hitler, Putler. So it is not the question of language, it is question, so don't substitute, it is a stupid game to prohibit languages or culture.
I'm sorry, I'm not going to speak about Ukrainian, but now they say we are too aggressive towards Russians. And for example, there's a huge discussion in Ukrainian social media that should we collaborate with Russians? I'm talking about, you know, exhibitions or film festivals, and it's really tough to collaborate with them. And now European society just wants to put us together. For example, I'm, as Ukrainian actress, went to Cannes Film Festival or Karlovy Film Festival, and there is a Russian also films. And how can I personally collaborate with them? For example, my home really was occupied, and the Russians live there, and they cheated a lot. And you know, I really heard that German people told me that you are too aggressive. You know, I would like to find out your attitude. What should we do? How we should collaborate? And I really hope you understand it, you feel for us. But I really have been, I really saw there is a lot of programs here. There are Russians and Ukrainians and Belarusians. How can we collaborate with them? At least now, when war is still going on. Thank you.
Thank you. That is, I think, a nice lead to Marc-André, who maybe can say something about the future of today's program, at least.
Well, yeah, thank you all for participating first. Thank you all for being here as well, for participating as well in the discussion. It is right, there are many questions that came up in the last 5 minutes, actually, that we are maybe not really addressed in full here, but the program that we have today continues actually with similar questions. We have a film program, we have a theater program here that will address as well similar questions. We have in the following days as well some topics that will, or presentations, artistic presentations that will address these questions. And what we said yesterday at the opening, the Goethe-Institut in Exile is a space actually for or seen as a platform for artists that have been partnering with institutes as well in countries where they can't work right now in the moment. And Ukraine is a specific context, and we saw it today as well in this discussion. We have other countries that we will focus on, and one of these countries is as well Belarus. We had our Secretary General heading it yesterday. The institute has been closed, so we have to kind of find ways, and I don't know, it's really an experiment for us as well, this Goethe-Institut in Exile. We have to find ways to get together, to see, is it working or is it not working? And I think this is something that is, for us, I don't say the beauty, but it is the chance, actually, of developing models, hopefully, that will work in the future as well. And so I think, for us, it's a way to engage with you, to engage with the artists, with the communities, and with the partners as well, and with the German partners, which is, for us, extremely important as well, to have this kind of playback and say, this is what we kind of represent in our host countries, and this is what we want to play back as well to our German society and to the German partners as well. So and therefore, I think what we will have in the next 2 years is really exactly this discussion. We'll have it on and on and on and on again, I think. But this is the way, actually, forward. We have to discuss in a way, somehow. That's my position. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank Dr. Jörg Morré, Dr. Susann Worschech, and Liubov Morozova. It's been an intense discussion. Thank you very much for being here. And maybe after there's a chance to get into a bilateral conversation. Thank you very much for being here. See you soon.